to another World of Warships video. We just looked at two of the least popular cruisers, Castilla being in my opinion, very strong and fun cruiser that not a lot of people play. Yodo being a very turbo dog shit, useless cruiser that not a lot of people play. And I figured that would kind of transition nicely into looking at some of the more OGs. I figured we'd start with Zhao since we just did Yodo and maybe look at Hindenburg next. Um, the Zhao. What is the point of playing the Zhao in World of Warships these days? Honestly, in my opinion, there's not much. Kind of the ship has really two things going for it that make it slightly different, maybe a little bit more unique than a lot of the, kiting cruisers. Um, One is obviously the concealment. Pretty much have the best concealment of all the heavy cruisers in the game, I believe, 9.9. And then you're quite accurate. The Zhao does get improved dispersion over normal cruiser dispersion. And then the maneuverability, specifically the rudder shift. The turning circle isn't really anything special on Zhao, but the rudder shift is kind of like noticeably better than most heavy cruisers. So you can make a legitimate case for the Zhao that it has actually probably been less affected by retarded overmatch power creep on BBs. Um, it's been in some ways affected less, in some ways affected more. Um, it is kind of the most maneuverable heavy cruiser in many ways, so in that regard, it kind of suffers a bit less than some of these bigger ships like Hindenburg, but that can't really get out of the way of shells. But then the problem being, of course, the very limited HP pool, and you only have 4 heals with the Superintendent spec. Unlike something like Hindenburg, well, yeah, maybe it dodges a little bit worse, but it has more HP and more heals, so maybe it has a bit more sustain if it does take hits. Um, so the Zhao with the concealment, I do think pays pretty well. It pays pretty well in the Zhao to at least start the game at fairly close range. There would kind of be a temptation here to instantly kite out on the 10 line and get the nice, farming damage on this GK, right? But I don't really want to give up being super close range. The Zhao's kind of like, in a way, almost like the OG Venezia when it comes to hitting destroyers. You don't have the salvo weight that something like Venezia has, but you do have the accuracy to hit. I mean, there you see we hit 8 out of 9 shells because I only fired 3 turrets at that guy. So the improved accuracy and the very good shell velocity on Zhao, I mean, you see the kind of damage that it does to destroyers. And in my opinion, this is probably the Zhao's like maybe greatest asset over something like Hindenburg. Like if you are just going to play permakite HE spam, I don't even think the Zhao is that good. I really don't. The damage it pumps out is just so kind of okay in that situation. Um, and then another thing I wanted to mention was like the very decent AP that Zhao gets that I'm always kind of trying to use, which again entices you to play a little bit more close range than a lot of these kiting cruisers do. And it's not really that the AP is some kind of magical like Moskva level AP. It's just the accuracy. It's just the fact that if you get a cruiser flat broadside and you do have the pen to citadel them, you're at close enough range. Um, it's just that Zhao is going to hit a lot more shells on the Citadel on average than even a ship like Hindenburg will, even though they have the same count of guns. Um, that's kind of the main idea. Um, and so the Zhao is like this very, to me, interesting mix of comfort and pain to play. Like the concealment, the maneuverability, and the accuracy are all very nice. It's like the package of the accuracy, maneuverability, and concealment is really really still enjoyable to me. But then it's kind of paired with the kind of like the worst firing angles known to man, and it's quite a like paradoxical experience. Um, Trying to get all of these guns on the fight against a battleship player, like for example, who's actually semi-competent at the game, is really an issue because even with this nice rudder shift, every time you swivel to get your front or your rear guns on people, depending on how you're oriented, you're definitely giving enough side to just straight up take citadels just on the main belt. You don't even have to take them through the nose or ass because you're going to be going like 45 degrees to shoot all these guns, and kind of every battleship in the game is going to have a good chance of citadeling you at that range. It's and then the torp firing angles are kind of particularly egregious. You do have to go almost worse than flat broadside to use them because the torps launch out of the ass. If you are facing forward and the ship that you are trying to target is going, say, like perpendicular, like 90 degrees to you, like crossing the T on you, then you can't just be flat to them, right? Because the torps have to go out in front of the target. So it's really even worse than you would maybe think. There you see we got 7 out of 12 hits on that Malta, like across the map for a couple of citadels. Anything that the Zhao has the AP pen to hit, you kind of are one of the scarier cruisers, I would argue, in the game, just down to the incredible accuracy that you have. There's kind of no going flat to the Zhao and getting away with it on a well-aimed AP salvo. And so those are kind of the three things that the Zhao has going for it, in my opinion. The maneuverability, the concealment that lets you get more game impactful shots off. Right, like in that early game situation in something like the Hindenburg, it's like I'm not doing, 17k damage to a daring at that range in 2 shots, right? That's never gonna fucking happen. Uh, and the concealment on the Zhao does let you get in closer. I mean, you see like the accuracy. I mean, it's like incredibly, incredibly good. So that is satisfying, but to me, the discomfort of the firing angles on the guns and on the torpedoes, and then the lack of DPM kind of make me not play the Zhao as much as I normally do. Now, I do think that the Zhao is uh, very quite strong when paired with a destroyer in a division. I mean, you could make this argument of any cruiser, any ship in the game, right? But the ability of this thing to kind of just tool around behind its own Shimakaze player, like 5 kilometers behind, and then your Shima spots a destroyer who tries to turn out, and now they're like 9-9-5 from the Zhao. You really are kind of like a mini Venezia, and that can lead to some really good high game impact salvos super early. But when it comes to playing solo, I do think that the Zhao is kind of a troll pick, even compared to something like Hindenburg. And the biggest problem is the lack of effective damage output on anything with armor played by anyone with skill. Right, so some of these more OG battleships, Yamato with its 32 extremities and upper belt, you do very nice damage because the HE does hit quite hard. I want to say it's around 3,400. Yep, 3,400. So the salvo weight is quite good. But the issue is the second anything goes nose in, especially anything with remotely decent plating, even like a USBB with 38 upper side and deck, you're kind of instantly worse than Hindenburg in multiple ways too. You see more citadels at long range. Um, and that's kind of the problem is the reload time is a bit of an issue. The reload time combined with the firing angles and the lack of HE pen um, to me is what kind of makes a ship like Hindenburg just really straight up overall better in today's World of Warships. You're both you're both susceptible to 30 mil overmatch, but the Hindenburg does get, especially with that extra heal, about 12 to 13,000 more total HP throughout the course of a game. It gets significantly better just DPM, and it's also much more effective DPM. The Zhao particularly struggles against any like kind of armored cruiser. The Hindenburg, in a 1v1 situation with, say, a Moskva, can just angle up in kite and pump out mad damage against a Moskva, Petro, one of those kind of ships. And the Zhao is pretty much getting most of its damage through fire. But then, since it has to go so broadside to these ships, it can kind of effectively never shoot its guns. And even wiggling back and forth to try to get guns off in the fight at times is fairly impossible in the Zhao against anything with improved pen angles. Petro, Stalin, Des Moines, these kind of ships, you're kind of just trapped in nosing gameplay. This game is basically won. I'm trying to whore a little bit of extra damage, so I'm just kind of running in. And I'm kind of just wiggling back and forth, using the very decent rudder shift to try to catch shells. And you see here that, I had two battleships that don't overmatch me, and then the Yamato. So just this wiggling back and forth constantly is really quite effective at. Now, in this situation, though, however, I want you to think about this situation in a Hindenburg, where I would be able to angle and get all of my guns off. And not only that, the AP DPM on Hindenburg is close to double when you're able to use it, like on a battleship at this angle. This would be just mad, crazy amounts of damage in something like a Hindenburg, right? Um, and of course, you could actually use the torps. I can't use the torps without going flat. Now, this guy uh, is your average battleship player. Um, he clearly has no idea where to aim on something like a Zhao. You saw he just basically put 9 out of 9 shells straight into my upper belt, which is very cool. So against a ship like Yamato, pretty much the only way you mitigate damage is by swiveling like this. And this is what I mean when I say that Zhao can at times be less susceptible to 30 mil overmatch. Because in this situation, if I was in most heavy cruisers, I just wouldn't have the rudder shift to like whip the ass around like this and make it a lot more complicated. Like, battleship players who don't have great aim do find it very difficult to punish you when you do this kind of wiggling back and forth situation. I mean, you see here, this guy like basically couldn't do 10,000 damage to me with the Yamato salvo. You're in something like a Hindenburg, pretty much for sure that would have been a kill from this guy. And he's definitely going to kill me with the next shot, because he's like, what, 2 overpens, so we might as well just go flat and pour some damage with the torps. Yeah, I think if you've watched any of my videos, I mentioned this in the Castilla video, that the Castilla can kite and an HE farm. Obviously not as well as something like Zhao. The Zhao is still fairly decent by even 2024 standards at just HE kiting and farming, but it really can only push in against bad players. Like, there's really no excuse for that Iowa not killing me. He just dumped 9 shells straight into my main belt for 0 damage, when if he had shot my nose, he would have killed me with like 3 shells, right? So that clip is definitely not an example of the Zhao being tanky, or the Zhao having an ability to brawl. In that situation in the Hindenburg, I would have killed that Iowa 20 seconds earlier, just pumping crazy AP damage into him. And Zhao's reload is just a bit of a problem when you get in these close range situations. The reload, the firing angles, the torp firing angles, the turret traverse time, it's kind of all a problem, and that is why I typically try to push in pretty close pretty early. You see like almost 3k base XP, basically down to a lot of destroyer damage, 15k on the daring in 2 salvos, which is pretty good, 8k on the black in like 1 salvo. Um, And then, you know, you do farm very well, obviously, but the problem is in any situation where this concealment on the Zhao isn't being utilized, then you're kind of just in a you know, comparing it to 12 gun cruisers. I'd much rather be in a Hindenburg is kind of my problem with the Zhao. If it, you know, if my choices are playing uh 12 gun, you know, HE spammers, uh I honestly think it's still Hindenburg for me. Well, you know, we'll kind of go over that in the next video when we look at Hindenburg, but I do think the combination of Zhao's reload, turret traverse, firing angles, torp firing angles just make it very, very problematic to play in anything that is like a slugging it out fest where you are going to eat shit, but you just have to put enough damage out to make it worth it. And the Zhao is just kind of incapable of doing that against most battleships. But having said all of that, the Zhao can definitely perform. I just do think that it's a bit more matchmaker susceptible. Now, not compared to something like Yodo. I don't really know if there's a single situation I would rather be in Yodo than Zhao. I'm kind of trying to find one. Maybe a destroyer at 5 kilometers running into your hydro. Yeah, it's pretty hard to think of a scenario where I'm on 1 HP maybe and I can't shoot or I'll die, so I can spam torps and Yodo, right? But in a typical game, looking at the matchmaker here, they have 1 Yamato and then they have 4 battleships with 406s. But the battleship power creep is, you know, I typically harp on things like speed, things like concealment, things like gun caliber. All valid, all valid examples of battleship power creep. But battleship tankiness power creep is quite a real thing. It feels like we can't get a battleship these days without some sort of insane improved survivability, whether it's Loria with deck platings that shatter all HE in the game except maybe Hanover, whether it's Maine that is literally impossible to kill with fires and floods, or even torps for that matter. Um, Whether it's, I mean, Loria has improved sit repair, right? Rhode Island gets 40-second heals. Vermont, when they changed it, got 40-second heals. You know, devastation with its super heal, just the sheer HP pool of the super BBs. Yeah, you can kind of access some of that through fires, but then we have super ships like Maine that are just 100% immune to fires. I mean, they can have 31-second immunity with American brain damage cold ECP mod. They can have, you know, an F key that reduces, you know, a triple fire down to the effect of a single fire. So uh, there's just a lot more HP to chew through in the game than there was, you know, back in the day. So there's really quite a few factors. There you see the Stalingrad with range mod is AFK and spawn cross mapping me, which is pretty cool. So that's going to mean I now, instead of angling a slightly better way that requires the BBs to push more into me, I now have to kind of give them a more favorable angle, but you know, such is life. Um, but so this is a matchmaker that I would say is pretty solid for Zhao. Down to a few things. One, you want high DD count games because truly the only value this improved accuracy really gives you is punishing destroyers and punishing flat broadside cruisers that you can Citadel. Those are kind of the only situations where the improved accuracy really matters. A nose like this nose in Montana and Maine pushing me, like, does it matter that this ship is like 10% more accurate than Hindenburg? No, not at all. You'd still much rather have the improved HE pen on Hindenburg in this situation. Uh, and I don't really know. I truly don't really know what the solution to uh, not really even the issues of Zhao, but just its kind of lack of relevance. This guy gets a one shell fire on him. Let's pay attention to that because it's going to be an interesting trend. Um, when it comes to farming battleships, the Zhao doesn't really have much in the way of HE DPM, right? again, comparing it to Hindenburg, you have less HE DPM than Hindenburg, but you also have uh, low pen. So Hindenburg's effective HE DPM is not just, on paper the like 5% better that on paper it is. It's actually quite a lot better because number one on Zhao, you basically have to run range mod or the unique upgrade, the ledge mod. So you cannot buff really the DPM with Zhao. The range base is a little bit too limited, and the turrets already turn quite slow, and nerfing that more with reload mod is also problematic. So it's very hard to justify taking reload on Zhao, whereas a ship like Hindenburg has a much closer to comfy max range. You don't really need range on Hindenburg, so you can kind of number one buff the DPM that way. But then number two, the effective DPM because of the high pen is much higher. Now again, like I said in the last replay, the Amato's a ship that you do quite well against because of the upper belt and no icebreaker and things like that. If you have it broadside, you're just very likely to get a ton of HE pens no matter what. But it's the Zhao is just kind of a, it's the kind of design that was good back in the day, and I would argue that a ship like the Hindenburg is a ship design that's gotten really better with age. And I think that's down more to improved armor platings. Um, like I said, battleships. There's a lot of power creep in the battleship department with platings. But there was for a time with the Russian cruisers with Napoli, things like that, a lot of power creep in the cruiser armor platings as well. There's quite a few cruisers in the game that have 40 and 50 decks that didn't exist back in the day. So with age, Hindenburg's effective DPM has pretty much stayed the same, and Zhao's effective DPM has kind of just fallen off a fucking cliff, which is really quite tragic. And I truly don't think that when it comes to farming battleships, this improved accuracy really makes up for anything. Like I said, you're looking for the DDs. You're looking for the close range fights. This is what we're looking for here, right? We're looking for big, fat, useless destroyers like Holland um, that we can just push into. Because you do really hurt destroyers. That's kind of still something you are one of the best at. Um, probably after, probably after Venezia. I would argue that after Venezia, you're probably top dog when it comes to slamming destroyers in the Zhao. And in some situations, maybe even better than the Ven because the concealment lets you get those salvos off at a range where you like cannot possibly miss. Whereas with the Ven, they spot you even with full concealment build at like what 12.5 or 12 kilometers something. Um, and you have similar shell velocity in Zhao and the Ven, so it does kind of work out to be like a lot easier to hit Zhao shells at 10 than Ven at 12. So there are situations where pushing in, especially, you're almost more painful for destroyers to deal with in many ways. But really, the problem is just you don't have like almost any ability to really fight battleship players aside from lobotomized players like you saw in that first replay. Uh, Kiting on a flank at long range, you definitely do well against battleships, but that's kind of it. Still, I would argue not as well overall as maybe Hindenburg. And what I want out of a cruiser is I want the ability to do one of two things when it comes to pushing in. I either want the ability to legitimately tank damage and survive when being shot at, or I want the ability to pump out so much damage that the battleship player kind of like has to two-shot me or less, or I'm going to kill them, right? Like something like a Des Moines with a DPM build, a Salem particularly, you don't really have any armor. Against anything with 406s, your armor is like what, effectively the same or worse than Zhao, right? Because you are kind of big. But the difference being that front gun Des Moines, while nose in, has triple the DPM of front gun Zhao. So yeah, neither of those cruisers is going to tank in the sense that they're going to get shot at by a Montana at 6 kilometers and somehow shrug it off and only take 10 or 15k damage, right? They're probably both getting 20 to 35k, but the difference being that uh, the Des Moines has these improved pen angles, this crazy rate of fire that make it a deterrence style of cruiser, and even the Hindenburg really has a lot of that going for it at close range. The torp angles are really good. You don't have the DPM of Des Moines, but it's still very, very respectable, even shooting like just front guns, because you get the reload down in the 7-second range a lot of the time. So the Zhao just really can't push against any battleship that's semi-competent, and that's kind of my issue with it. Is there's just a lot of games where the only win condition is pushing, and you don't have the ability to push. Uh, this is very different from a ship we just looked at a couple of videos ago, the Castilla. Um, yeah, the Castilla obviously doesn't kite farm as well as the Zhao. Um, at least not in the fire setting department. I mean, you could like legitimately make an argument that when it comes to just damage output, because Castilla pens 40, right? Zhao pens 42, I guess technically. But with the improved pen, you can make a case that the raw effective DPM HE of Castilla is actually pretty close to Zhao. You don't have the accuracy, but the biggest thing is you can push in. Uh, yeah, you can just push in. You have the speed, you have the gun power, you have the torp firing angles to actually push in, and that's ultimately my issue with the Zhao. If you are a player who doesn't really care that you can never push effectively, uh, like you play a ton of AFK HE spammers, I think the Zhao is still pretty good. I think it really is quite decent at uh, AFK HE spamming, especially at medium to long range, especially against ships with floatier shells, even ships that overmatch you. I would argue that you take a Zhao and a Hindenburg, put them on the same flank against, say, like a Vermont. Um, I would argue that the Zhao would probably live a bit longer because despite having less HP and less heals, it can actually dodge those overmatching salvos, right? In a way that something like Hindenburg struggles a lot more to. In a way like a lot of cruisers struggle a lot more too. I do think you still dodge fairly well in the Zhao if you know what you're doing. But the problem is that advantage is a very niche advantage. It's only relevant at 15 plus kilometers. I mean, no Vermont player with hands is missing a Zhao inside of 15, right? So it's really only effective at very long range. Um, and then you don't really have deterrence, like I was saying, deterrent style damage output, um, or the pen. Again, we're just going to kind of keep comparing Zhao to Hindenburg because they're both kind of the OG no utility kite farmers. Um, Getting farmed by 12 gun Hindenburg, with getting all its guns off, yeah, you might overmatch it for 15k a pop, but in between your salvos and the Vermont, that thing is putting out mad damage against you, right? So that's kind of the idea of there are ships that struggle with battleship overmatch power creep in the armor department, but have that kind of deterrence damage output where the battleship player has to invest a lot of HP to killing you, and especially you seem like AP with no at an angle with no citadels still like 11k. So you definitely just like with Hindenburg. Zhao and Hindenburg both want to be constantly using AP on really almost anything that's flat broadside that you can pen, even if it's no citadels. But I just, it's just feeling like I'm out of the game is not a feeling I enjoy. And I think in the Zhao, there's just too many games where you kind of feel like you're out of the game. Comparing this to Yodo, obviously, it's not even close to as true because at least you do have this accuracy and this AP and the shell velocity. When a DD fucks up or gets spotted, even at medium range, you can hit them. Uh, Yodo especially having the ability to basically citadel nothing is to me a huge problem because there's a lot of bot cruiser players that will just go flat to your cruiser at like 10 to 15 kilometers, and instead of punching them for 20, 30k in Zao, you're just like slinging fucking Nerf balls at them. So it's just kind of hard to me, it's just kind of hard to justify playing the Zao solo. Like I said, in a division, playing that close support role for a destroyer, I do think the Zao is quite good still. I do think it's better than a lot, really, than a lot of cruisers. I truly do. You pair this with a like a stealthy destroyer who can outspot or just even counterspot enemy destroyers. And then there's a Zao tooling along at super close range. Again, at like 10 kilometers, you're just not going to do less than 5k to a DD when they turn out against you. More like 7 to 8k a lot of the time. The detect, especially to air, is still very nice when there's CVs in the game, especially subs. I mentioned this in a lot of different videos, but subs, or Zao, sorry, sub detect when they're at periscope being only 5.8, and then you do get the submarine surveillance is quite nice compared to other ships. So there's definitely Zao is still, I think, in my opinion, a very, very decent ship. I just don't really see any reason to play it solo, is my problem with it. And typically, most of my reviews are kind of overall. I do, point out that some ships do scale more in a division, but the idea is mostly like, you're loading up you got to pick a cruiser and you're loading up solo into random battles. In my opinion, the Zao is better than some, but it's just not very good, and I don't really think that I think some people, the HP pool is low, but I do think the stealth and the maneuverability make up for a lot of Zhao's survivability problems. I think really the issue is kind of the damage output. And, if you, like, for example, go to, like, Ship Tool and you start sorting cruisers by HEDPM, you're going to see a trend. When you get to the Zao and you start looking at ships that have lower DPM than Zao, they all, and I mean all of them, have incredibly powerful other gimmicks that justify their bad DPM, right? Like, the Zao barely has more HE DPM than Austin. Now, obviously, Austin doesn't pen 32 like Zao does, but Austin gets a reload booster, and it gets sap. Um, it's like you barely have more HE DPM than the fucking Commissar, which gets overmatching improved pen angle AP, uh, and Nakibal rocket planes, right? I mean, like, you barely have more HE DPM than Moskva, that has insane utility. You barely have more HE DPM than Goliath, which pens like almost every battleship deck in the game and has a super heal. You don't even have much more HE DPM than Yoshino, which gets 50 mil pen, there's just every ship that has worse DPM than the Zao. Well, number one, most of them can afford to take reload mods. That's a thing that kind of makes up for their lower DPM. But they all, I mean basically all, if you sort cruisers by HE DPM, they all have way higher pen than Zao. The only real difference is like Kitakami and Austin, which have other crazy gimmicks, obviously. But everything else has like more HE pen and other gimmicks on top of it. The Zao is basically a gimmick-free ship. Slightly improved accuracy over other cruisers being really its only, can you even call that a gimmick? Anyway, starting with the build, I'm running the spotting aircraft paired with Eye in the Sky. There's not really anything else worth taking in slot 1, but I do kind of like this because it gives you a nice length of time to farm with that first spotter plane when the game starts. Especially any game where there's like a CV in your lobby and ships start getting spotted in like that 20 to 22 kilometer range. I do enjoy having the 2 minutes of farm early game. You would probably take Hydro Mod here. You definitely want accuracy. This is a pretty tough decision. because the Zhao has already a very like decent rudder shift. I think base it's somewhere around maybe 7.7 or something. But the firing angles, man, the firing angles are so bad that slightly improving the rudder shift to me when you're in the kite. Um, I think the Zhao dodges fairly evenly, whipping its ass around kiting and stopping. I think it's kind of a mix 50-50 of how you dodge the incoming shells. Uh, and especially if it's something that totally overmatches you, right, with 457s or something. Um, Slowing down in a cruiser is typically, I mean, it can dodge shells outright, but typically it's the most valuable way of dodging against ships that do not overmatch your deck armor. So when you're being shot at by like a Montana, uh, and you slow down, and he either catches your nose or your deck, he's gonna get like a lot of overpens, right? Whereas when something like a Vermont shoots you and you slow down and you take 4 or 5 hits on the deck, those are now pens, right? So that's kind of the idea with taking steering gears instead of prop mod, but I think that's kind of a preference thing. Prop mod is better. Dodging, I think, shells at long range and especially shells that don't overmatch you. The rudder is super useful, way more useful when dodging at close range. So kind of a mix there. This slot you either want range or the legendary mod. The legendary mod is good on the Zhao, um, but the problem is you're investing in Zhao. Um, and I don't think the legendary mod all of a sudden makes the ship play it like it's a playable ship. It's not a bad ship. It's just like this isn't even something like Cabo where the ship sucks and then the ledge mod makes it playable. Um, this is like the ship is okay and the ledge mod makes it a bit more okay. I do think it's a good legendary mod. If you're like addicted to Zhao for some reason, like you play the fuck out of Zhao and you don't have the legend mod, I do think you should probably get it. If it's for some reason like one of the cruisers you play the most. Uh, I'm running Hydro. You get sub surveillance, which is pretty nice. You get airstrike planes, which is pretty nice. Why are we looking at that? We need to look at the captain. I do think this is a fairly optimal build for Zhao. Pretty much the only thing I would maybe change would be you could drop Demolition Expert. I do think on this guy is an incredibly useful skill. You absolutely want Turret Traverse. You absolutely want Gun Feeder. You absolutely want Last Stand. Um, so basically what ends up happening is because in my opinion you want these top three skills and you definitely want all of these skills 100% no questions asked, this gives you 3 points to work with. So you either would take something like Demo Expert, or I guess the question is what else would be worth taking on the Zhao. Um, in my opinion, not really anything. I don't think there's any value in buffing the torps in any way on Zhao. The firing angles are you have to go so far out of your way in Zhao to utilize the torpedoes. You have to make like a conscious decision to stop shooting long enough to get dark, turn out, go flat broadside to whatever's pushing you, get the torps out. Like I don't see any value in it. I mean, you could go ahead, buff the torps, or you could kind of gamble, and if you dropped Last Stand, Demo Expert, and Incoming Fire Alert, that would give you 4 points. Um, the question is, what are those 4 points good on? Top grade gunner, not so much because your concealment is so good that it's kind of hard to activate a lot of the time unless you're again playing that close in destroyer role. But the Zhao is not like a DPM ship really, uh, because of the long reload time and because you don't pen a lot of things. To me, it's more of a the individual salvo matters more on Zhao than it does on like something Hindenburg, where on Hindenburg maybe you're just more vomiting shells out constantly, right? So, you could definitely drop demo for PT, definitely something that you could do, but overall, kind of that's the build. I'm taking Fire Chance because in my opinion, these 3 points that I would save by dropping these two skills, I don't see much value in really anything else. Lastly, let's look at the armor real quick. And, it's, yeah, I mean, it's back in the day cruiser design. 25 nose and ass. There's no icebreaker. There's no side cheeks. There's no nothing. Um, but the Zhao does have like a very small amount of troll armor, admittedly. The Citadel is slightly troll, um, and that's really just because it's basically inaccessible under the guns when it's broadside. But the interesting thing with Zhao's Citadel is as soon as you start pushing in, right? As soon as you start pushing in, and anything overmatches you, yeah, it's pretty rough. It's extremely easy to Citadel. The reason why it's pretty hard flat is you see how sloped this is. It's similar to Yodo's Citadel, which we just looked at, but realistically speaking, this armored deck slope is never gonna take a pen from AP. It's just too angled. Even at very long range, it really is just effectively way too angled. Um, so generally speaking, the part of the Citadel that's accessible is this main armor belt here. Uh, Pretty unlikely that you get hit down here unless you're super close range and you get shells plunging through the water. So it's really just that the Citadel that can reliably get penetrated is not very long. But there's no other kind of like savior armor on the Zhao really. Like it's, as you can see, it's not really spaced. When you go nose in, anyone who knows how to aim can just fucking turbo smash you. And they don't really even need a ton of overmatch. I mean, it helps because of these wings on the Citadel. These cheeks are easier to hit, right? Like hitting it here, you're gonna ricochet if you don't have a 30 mil overmatch. Hitting here, you're gonna ricochet. But even just straight through the bow, as long as you have four even 380s and this thing is perfectly nose in, you can definitely cook it through the nose. Uh, I don't really know what the solution. Wargaming has buffed Zhao now a couple of times. They've given it more HP. They've given it a bit better turret traverse. But I do think at the end of the day, one of the biggest issues is you just can almost never take reload. Um, because number one, your base range. We can change this real quick. Look at the base range on Zhao. 16.2. 16.2 is not enough. This thing does not reliably dodge in the 14 to 15, 13 to 15 kilometer range, where this is your max range. Realistically, you're going to be fighting, at around 2/3 of your max range in a lot of cruisers. Um, and then you take reload, and your 180 time on the turrets becomes even worse. Again, this is with improved captain skill of Grease the Gears. So, in my opinion, the Zhao could be nicely buffed by just improving its max range. Um, what I would like to see on the Zhao, personally, I would like to see the maximum range up to like low 17s, somewhere around 17, like around Hindenburg base max range, right? I would like to see the max range bumped up right around 17, maybe 17.5. Then what I would like to see is the legendary mob would not give you range. The ledge mob would give you just better shell dispersion. And so there would be this very real trade-off that you would maybe have to pick on DPM that you absolutely can afford to take because of your range, or improved dispersion, right? Because as the Zhao kind of stands now, the ledge mod is kind of an objective buff. Again, the reason why I said I wouldn't probably take it is just like spending RB points on ledge mod for Zhao, a ship I don't think is super worth playing, is questionable. But the point being that if you're the kind of person who, like, Zhao is your most played ship, you play it like constantly. The main battering firing range buff of 8% does put you in that range I was just talking about, that like low to mid 17 kilometer range, which is a pretty comfy range for Zhao. That's really the only range buff it really needs. So this gives you the range you need and better dispersion. So I would love to see a further buff to Zhao's turret traverse, maybe another 5 seconds off of it, and then I would love to see the max base range increase to like 17.3 maybe, and then dropping the improved firing range from the improved bridge unique upgrade, and then people could make the choice between DPM, accuracy, or really good range. Um, I think that'd be a very interesting change to the Zhao. Um, and I mean, to me, that's really almost all it need to become a bit more interesting in my book. Um, I do think it could stand a bit of a base DPM buff as well. I don't think if you took the reload on Zhao down from, uh, base it's 13.7. This is with reload mod. I don't think if you took the base reload from 13.7 down to say 12.5, the ship would become overpowered or even objectively strong. But I do think it would be a bit more relevant with a slightly higher DPM because you compare Zhao to the ships that have 203s. Like, dude, the fact that Zhao, because again, you cannot run reload basically. You control and run reload, but you essentially cannot run reload mod like at all. You basically just straight up cannot afford to run reload mod on Zhao. So because you have to run range mod, whereas a ship like Moskva, like Moskva with reload mod is the same DPM as Zhao with range mod, and then Moskva has more range, better shell hearts, like, and a crazy good hull with 12 km radar, and what, like 17, 16, 17,000 more HP. Like, that's kind of the thing, is I understand you don't have the stealth, but like, bro, Moskva out DPMs this in any like real world situation. Moskva basically out DPMs out, which I think is fucking bananas if you ask me. I mean, I think that is like legitimately fucking insane. Moskva barely starts less fires than Zhao too. So like, despite your fire chance being super good, we're buffing it a bit because we're taking the flags and we're taking the captain skill. But like, your fire chance is like kind of around Des Moines, Hindenburg fire chance. It's not like something, or sorry, your fires per minute is not something like truly insane, and then you don't get any kind of improved HE penetration. So, the Zhao is a bit of a chill ship because you have the concealment to never really be in risk unless you want yourself to be in risk, but can't push in against any battleship player that's remotely competent. Yeah, 100% better than Yodo that we just looked at. Yodo's an insult to the player base. I don't think Zhao in its current state is insulting to the player base. I do think it just needs a little bit of quality of life improvements. Like I said, I'd take like a second off the reload, add about a kilometer of range, remove the range buff from Ledgemon, and then I think you'd have a very, very, very interesting competition. 3 ways for reload range and Ledgemon in slot 6. Will at least make the ship a bit more interesting, I think, and maybe slightly more competitive with these other HE spammers that get, way more improved penetration and typically other gimmicks. Yeah, we'll stop the rambling. That is it for Zhao. We'll see you in the next one for probably Hindenburg. Thanks for watching.